نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم أما بعد. So we are going to continue discussing Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi's iqtisad fi iqtisad, and we are going to see some brief commentary on what he has said. We have already discussed the 7 attributes that we can prove through rational reasoning alone, and now we're discussing some features about them. And the 7 were knowledge, power, life, will, hearing, seeing, and speech. And so this is the orthodox Sunni position of Ahl Sunnah, that these 7 attributes, they are not identical to Allah's essence. And this, if anyone asks you which scholar says this in the Ash'ari position, then it is here. You could give them the reference in Al-Iqtisad fi I'tiqad. Imam Ghazali certainly says this. This is on page 84. So it is something. Why is it? It is something additional. Zaidatun ala that. It is something addition to the essence. So he says here, بل هي زائدة على الذات فصانع العالم تعالى عندنا عالم بعلم. He is knower. He is a knower with knowledge. He is a living thing. He is living with life. قادر بقدرة. He has power. He is powerful through power. هكذا في جميع الصفات, and similarly in all of his attributes. And then he discusses how the Mu'tazila and the philosophers, ذهبت المعتزلة والفلاسفة إلى إنكار ذلك. They reject this. They deny that the attributes are separate from the essence. They claim that Allah is a single eternal essence, which might seem prima facie attractive and something which one might be inclined towards. However, and this is because they say that multiple eternal attributes implies multiplicity or multiple eternal entities, which they believe is invalid, because knowing doesn't require separate knowledge as an attribute, they believe. They say attributes are just states, ahwal of the essence, and they are not real entities. But their view is inconsistent. Especially the Mu'tazila, they contradict themselves because they affirm the will and speech as separate. They believe that Allah has a will because they know it says that Allah has a will in the Quran, and they also believe that Allah has a speech because it's clear from the Quran that Allah has a speech. Well, what does it say here? إلا أن الإرادة يخلقها. He creates the will. Allah creates the will is something which Allah creates outside of His essence. في غير محل, without a substrate. Well, so it doesn't exist in anything specific. And والكلام يخلقه في جسم جماد ويكون هو المتكلم به. And He creates the speech in inanimate body, and this body expresses Allah's speech. The philosophers, they are more consistent than the Mu'tazila. They deny all these separate attributes, including the speech and the will. And they claim, and this is like, if you see like Khalil Amdani, he represents this view, the Ismaili, and he says that they deny that all attributes is called divine simplicity. They claim that, so the philosophers, they claim that Allah creates hearing in the Prophet ﷺ in his dream or in a or even in wakefulness, but there is no actual sound produced externally, so only he is the one that can hear this. And this is how they explain revelation, seeing angels and hearing the Quran. But of course this is false, because we know that Jibreel alayhi salam was seen by other companions, like in hadith of Jibreel alayhi salatu salam. So what we do is we affirm the reality of the attributes, and we say Allah is knowing. And because Allah is knowing, this must imply He has knowledge. Knowing means understanding an essence with an attribute. If you say something is knowing, then it must have an attribute. And the example he gives here is, for example, if someone is wearing a shoe, then you say he cannot call him someone that wears a shoe if he does not possess shoes, slippers. Similarly, it makes no sense to say that something has knowledge if someone is knowledgeable if they do not possess knowledge. So they must possess knowledge as an attribute. This is obviously a property of sorts, and of course in modern context there are loads of different theories on properties. Is there a trope? Is there states? But what we mean is nothing deep. We're just trying to affirm. We're not trying to go into these deep theories. We're just trying to say that there is knowledge, and we affirm that Allah has knowledge. And this knowledge isn't identical to His essence, because His essence can't be reduced to simple knowledge, because knowledge by itself can't produce anything. So if we reduce Allah's essence to knowledge, then how is He a creator? So we can either say this about Allah in 2 ways. We could say it, the essence is something that possesses knowledge, or you could shortly say it, the essence is knowing. If I say, by saying the essence is knowing, this means the essence possesses knowledge, Therefore, if something possesses knowledge, this shows that there's a distinction between the essence and the knowledge, or else there would be no reason, there would be no need to say that the essence possesses this knowledge. So just by saying the essence is knowing, I am forfeiting that God has attributes and he isn't the way that those that from divine simplicity is. Here's an example of someone saying wearing shoes is the same saying he has a shoe on. Or you could just say the existence of the shoe on him. So the existence of a shoe on him is not a separate condition. Okay, there's a common confusion here that thinking that knowing implies a separate state resulting from knowledge. The reality is knowledge itself is the state. So someone might say that if God knows something, and thinking that God knowing implies a separate state. So then if you say he has a separate state, and then you might be inferring that God changes. But we are saying that he is in a separate state. It is the knowledge is the state itself that God possesses. So the idea of knowing is nothing beyond the essence possessing knowledge. All we're saying is the essence, it possesses knowledge, it has knowledge. So this key argument, which I think I've already hinted towards against the philosophers and the Mu'tazilites, is saying, is knowing the same thing as existing? If you say yes, knowing and existing can be reduced to the same thing, then saying he is knowing and existing is just a repetition, and it's nonsense. There's no need to say he is both knowing and existing if one of those words expresses the meaning of both, or they express the same thing. If they cannot be reduced to one another, then knowing is something extra added to the essence. And this is our point. This is what we are trying to say. And we're asking, is this knowledge something which is specific to the essence? Is it something which is specifically attached to the essence? And if you say no, it isn't specific to the essence, it isn't something which the essence possesses, then it makes no sense in defining and describing Allah as knowing. And then if you say yes, this knowledge is something, this additional knowledge is something which is specific to the essence, then we say this is exactly what we mean by an attribute. So this is quite important. What we mean by an attribute is something which is specific to an essence. So Allah's knowledge is clearly an attribute, it's a meaning. So the conclusion is they actually affirm what we say, but they dispute the terminology only. So they want to be clever and they want to affirm divine simplicity, but we are more upfront about it, and we say, in fact, you do believe, because even I'm pretty sure that even the Ismailis or the Neoplatonic Muslims, they say that God has this kind of knowledge. And all we're saying is, yes, if we know that knowledge and existence can't be reduced to the same thing, and what we're saying is knowledge is something which is additional to existence by itself, however, it is something additional which is specific to that existence or that essence, and this is what we mean by an attribute. And then there's another logical deduction. Is the meaning of powerful the same as the meaning of knowing? If they have the same meaning, then it's redundant to use both the words for Allah. If they aren't the same, then they are different attributes and they are different realities, which affirms our position. So he's saying, if you say that Allah is both alim and qadir, and they mean the same thing, then it's as though it's فَكَأَنَّا قُلْنَا قَادِرٌ قَادِرٌ. So when we say Allah is alim and qadir, then what is the same thing as saying qadir qadirun? And this is just repetition, which doesn't add any value or meaning to what we are trying, or it doesn't convey any meaning to a listener or someone we're trying to convey this religion to. And there is another issue that's going to be discussed. Does the knowledge cover all things? So does the knowledge refer to the possibilities, impossibilities, accidents, and substances? If you say yes, then it implies that one knowledge has infinite relations, because all possibilities and impossibilities are really an infinite amount. And they're saying here that this is absurd. And if you say no, this one knowledge, because we believe in Tawheed wal Sifat, that the attributes are one as well. So Allah has one knowledge, Allah has one will, Allah has one power, one life, etc. Then you're also saying that there's one thing which can relate to an infinite amount of things. So why can't we say the essence does this as well? So to sum up, this philosophical dilemma is, if one attribute can cover all functions, then there's no need for the attributes, because you could just say the essence suffices for all of these. And this leads to the Mu'tazila, the philosopher's view. So the response is this issue touches on deep philosophical complexities. Some scholars avoid it and just say we believe in this because قد ورد الشرع بها, the Sharia has come with it, and therefore we accept it because of the relevation, the naql, and also there is an ijma' from the Salaf that these things exist, so we believe in this as well. So they would argue possibly that the Sharia affirms one knowledge and not multiple knowledges, so we affirm what's stated, not what's inferred. But Revelation does mention multiple distinctions, like commands, which are not the same as prohibitions, and we know that the Quran is not the same as the Torah, and knowing the hidden isn't the same as knowing the visible. So these suggest different types of speech and knowledge. So what is the iqtisad fi i'tiqad, the balanced position? There are three views. The philosophers, which is an excessive reductionist view, that one essence is everything, there's no real attributes. The sum of the Mu'tazila and the Karramiyya view is excessive multiplication. They say infinite attributes for every relation. With the Karramiyya, these infinite attributes will exist within Allah, and the Mu'tazila would say they exist outside Allah, the will. The middle path, the al-iqtisad fi i'tiqad, the moderate path, attributes are real and distinct from the essence. The differences in application, e.g., knowing white versus black, are due to relational differences, but not different attributes. So there's such a difference exists between power and knowledge and life versus will, etc. And these are different entities, not just different aspects. He does not deny that there are differences in relations or applications, but he insists some differences between actions arise only from relational differences, but others point to essential differences in the attributes themselves. So what we're saying here is that with knowledge of different things, like a command and a prohibition, or something which is visible versus invisible, something which is wet versus which is dry, and etc., etc., all of these things have differences, but these differences are relational and can be reduced to knowledge. They fall within something's knowledge. Like I could say that I have a brain and I have one brain, and with this brain I am able to conceive of many things, but I still only have one brain. I have one consciousness, even if you want to break it down to consciousness. But just because I have different knowledge, because my consciousness expands to different things, doesn't mean I have multiple consciousnesses. I only have one consciousness which relates to many things. So similarly, we can say for Allah, He has one knowledge, and they include an infinite amount of things, but these are just different. These are just relational, and these differences in relation are these differences which we see in his knowledge is not, it doesn't imply that they are different knowledges, rather they are different relations. His knowledge relates differently to different things. His knowledge is applied differently to different things. However, there are some things, like if you look at the attributes themselves, like knowledge versus power, we know that these meanings, the meaning of knowledge versus the meaning of power, they have these differences are essential differences in the attributes themselves. Like if I say there's nothing within the definition of knowledge which implies power, or vice versa, and there's nothing in the definition of life which implies will, or vice versa. So there's a distinction between two types of differences. What we're saying, there's a relational difference only. For example, knowing a black object versus knowing a white object. It's the same knowledge. My knowledge, my attribute of knowledge doesn't change. It's the same attribute of knowledge. However, it relates to different objects. Like a command versus a prohibition versus use, they might arise from one speech. So this is talking about the kalam now. The speech is the same attribute. It's only one attribute that speaks. That is the speaker. However, it has different forms or targets, so it's relational. So these can be explained by one attribute with the varying relations. But there are essential differences between the attributes. For example, knowledge and life, and power and life, or will and knowledge. These differences cannot be explained just by relational differences. They reflect distinct internal qualities or realities. So the creed principle, the degrees of dissimilarity. Imam Ghazali argues that not all differences are the same. Some differences arise merely from objects, others are rooted in the very nature of the attribute. So knowing different things does not require multiple knowledges, but knowing is not the same as willing, which is not the same as creating. They require different attributes. So the differences between knowing and knowledge and power is greater than the difference between knowing X and knowing Y. This matters because if we reduce all attributes to one, as the philosophers do, we end up denying the real distinctions the Quran affirms. So once again, he's highlighting how it's so important to confirm the Quran and try to go back to the Quran, because God knows, He wills and creates and speaks. or saying God's single essence somehow performs diverse acts without distinct faculties, this is just unreasonable. So Imam Ghazali's middle way is there are real essential attributes, but they are distinct from one another, and each can have relational diversity in how they are applied. So then there's an issue about God's knowledge. Is it differentiated through His will and power? Are we able to distinguish between His knowledge through His will and power? So sort of. So Allah's knowledge applies to various objects, and Allah's will determines what will exist among the known things, and Allah's power brings it into being. So knowing a future event does not mean the same as willing it to happen, nor does it mean the same thing as causing it to happen. Right, so while knowledge applies universally, the diversity of divine action requires different attributes that relate to different functions. So not merely one attribute with changing relations. You can't just have one attribute, one essence here. So there's a real limited set of essential attributes, each with relational extensions, but not reducible to each other. So the differences in attributes is not the same as the differences in essence. So attributes are real and distinct. The divine essence is not sufficient by itself to explain all these qualities. Therefore, the 7 attributes are additional to the essence and not identical to it. So what we're saying here is Allah's knowledge, His power, will, etc. They are eternal and they have one essence, but they have different ta'alluqat. They relate differently to created things. Or this relational connection between Allah's attributes and creation is not in the divine essence or attribute itself, but in the application to contingent things. Okay. So the goal of theology is to show one's view is stronger than alternatives. So there's only 3 logical positions which exist, and we choose the one which is the least costly. So even if doubt remains, accept the strongest view, since the objections against it are lesser than those against others. So sometimes it's impossible to completely resolve everything, but because this is especially the case for Allah, because Allah and His divine attributes are beyond complete human understanding, and this is what Imam Ghazali is saying in his iqtisad fi iqtisad. So you should take that view which is the least expensive, the least costly, and this is around page 89. Also, an important point to mention is that when we say Allah, it isn't just referring to His essence. When we say Allah, because someone might say, أَتَقُولُ أَنَّ صِفَاتِ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى غَيْرُ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى, are you saying the attributes of Allah are independent of Him or separate from Him? قُلْنَا هَذَا خَطَأٌ, this is a mistake. فَإِنَّ إِذَا قُلْنَا اللَّهُ تَعَالَى, when we say Allah Ta'ala, فَقَدْ دَلَّلْنَا بِهِ عَلَى الذَّاتِ مَعَ الصِّفَاتِ, we refer to the essence with the attributes, لَا عَلَى الذَّاتِ بِمُجَرَّدِهَا, not the essence by itself. So, and about the dakhil fil ism, لا يكون عين الداخل في الاسم. For example, the hand of Zayd is not the Zayd, but it isn't identical to the entirety of Zayd. It is not 100% Zayd, but it is not other than Zayd. It has to exist. It cannot exist independently of Zayd, but you cannot say that the Zayd is reducible to his hand. This is the same. This is the case with all portions, everything which is apart. فليس غير الكل ولا هو بعينه الكل, because this portion of the thing isn't the entirety. Then there's just a slight critique of the Mu'tazila position. They fail to differentiate properly between power, qudra, and the will, the irada. If Allah can be powerful without power, then likewise He should be able to will, and He should be willing without will, which is illogical. So the argument is God is powerful by essence and thus can do all. If willing by essence, He'd will all, which is impossible due to contradiction. So they say that Allah, He's powerful by His essence, but therefore He can do everything. But if He was willful by His essence, then He would have willed everything as well, which is a contradiction, because there are different possibilities contradict each other, and if He willed every possibility, then contradictions would have arisen. The response is, even as He is powerful by essence, yet acts selectively, so too He can will selectively. So if you believe that He is only powerful by His essence, yet only one specific possibility was selected, then that means that He can act selectively with His power. So why can't He too? So too He can do so with the will. The will chooses selectively. That's what the definition of will is. So their view admits that many events fall outside Allah's power and will. So same logic applies to both attributes. A critique of the philosophers' position is they claim Allah speaks, but deny the both internal, the kalam nasfi, and the kalam lafzi, the sounds. They say Allah, it's created in the Prophet's mind. So it's an absurd implication. If so, then He would also be a sound maker or mover, since sound motion appears elsewhere. Their theory undermines revelation. It treats divine speech like a dream or hallucination. So the philosophers do not truly believe in Islam. He says they use religious language only for safety. Don't waste time with them on the details. Focus debate on foundational issues like the divine action, the power of creation. So do you say Allah's attributes are other than Allah? We say that's incorrect. When we say Allah, we mean the essence along with the attributes, not the essence alone. The name Allah does not apply to an essence that is stripped of divine attributes, just as we do not say the knowledge is something separate from the scholar, or that the hand of Zayd is something other than Zayd, or that the carpenter's hand is something other than the carpenter. For something that is a part of a thing and included within its name cannot be called entirely other than it, but it also is not identical to the whole. So the hand of Zayd is not Zayd himself, but also not other than him. Similarly, every part is neither the whole nor something completely separate from it. So for someone says knowledge is other than the human being, that is a figurative statement, but it is incorrect to say knowledge is other than the scholar, because the term human being does not necessarily imply knowledge, but the term scholar does. So yes, if it is permissible to say that the attribute is other than essence it inheres in, but in the sense that the meaning of its name is not the same as the name of the essence. So the name of the essence and the meaning of the attribute aren't always the same. So it's permissible to say that the attribute is other than the essence in that sense. And this kind of distinction is permissible under two conditions: that the Sharia does not prohibit the usage of that name, and this applies only to Allah, and that the term other is not understood in such a way that implies the independent existence of the other without that which it is other than. So you're saying it exists independently of Allah, and this is not permissible. So if someone understands otherness to imply such separability, then we cannot say that Zayd's blackness is other than Zayd, since it cannot exist apart from Zayd.